She just came for a cup of something warm. But what the man saw in the park changed everything. Watch till the end. You won't believe what happened. Like and subscribe. More powerful stories are on the way. The wind whispered through the leafless branches of the trees, carrying the bite of January air with it. Despite the cold, the park held a peculiar charm that day. Children laughing as they skated across the frozen pond, bundled couples walking hand in hand, and parents watching from benches, sipping warm drinks from paper cups. On a wooden bench near the edge of the skating rink sat a man and his son, a quiet moment in an otherwise fast-moving world. The man, Steve, looked to be in his late 30s. His dark hair was slightly tousled from the wind, and faint lines etched the corners of his eyes. Beside him, wrapped in a thick blue coat with a hood too big for his head, sat his 10-year-old son, Michael. A small, contemplative boy with wide, observant eyes. Each held a cup of hot chocolate, steam curling up into the frosty air between them. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. There was a comfort in the silence, in simply sitting side by side and watching the world unfold. Michael gently rocked his legs back and forth beneath the bench, the toes of his boots just barely scraping the snow. He sipped from his cup and exhaled deeply, warming his nose in the rising steam. Steve was staring off into the distance. His gaze was unfocused, drifting somewhere between the skating rink and the pale winter sky. His thoughts, however, were not in the present. He often found himself in moments like these, stolen pockets of peace that felt incomplete. It had been 8 years since the accident. 8 years since he lost Clara. Clara. Just the name brought a soft ache to his chest. She had been his wife, his partner, his best friend, and then, in a blink, she was gone, or so he had believed. They had been in the car together, the three of them. Steve remembered the flash of headlights, the scream of twisting metal, and the world turning black. When he woke up in the hospital, the doctors told him Michael had survived miraculously with only minor injuries. But Clara, she was gone. Gone. Except somehow that word never truly settled in his bones. There was no funeral, no body, just a closed casket and endless silence. He never saw her one last time. Something inside him always held on to the faint, irrational hope that maybe, just maybe. Michael stirred beside him, breaking the trance. He was peering intently at something near the hot drink stand across the path. "Dad?" Michael said softly, nudging Steve's arm. Steve turned his head slightly, still half caught in memory. "Yeah, buddy?" Michael didn't respond at first. He tilted his head, squinting. Then, slowly, he pointed with his mittened hand. "That woman over there, her scarf, it looks just like Mom's." Steve's breath caught. He followed his son's gaze across the park. Standing near the small wooden booth that sold hot drinks and snacks was a woman. She was speaking to the barista, smiling faintly. Her face was mostly obscured by a woolen hat pulled low over her forehead, but her scarf. Steve's eyes widened. It was a gray-green scarf, thickly knitted with faded thread and embroidered with delicate vines along the ends. An unmistakable pattern. His breath quickened as recognition thundered in his chest. Clara's scarf. Not a similar one. Not a replica. That exact one. He knew every thread of it. He had bought it for her during their honeymoon, in a little shop nestled in the hills of Vermont. She loved it so much she wore it almost every day, even indoors. It had been her comfort, her favorite, and when she died, he thought it had been buried with her. Steve slowly stood up, eyes locked on the woman. The wind seemed to fade away. The world around him blurred. He felt lightheaded, as if the ground beneath his feet no longer existed. Michael looked up at him. "Dad, is something wrong?" Steve didn't answer. His legs moved on their own, carrying him across the icy path toward the woman with the scarf. He didn't even feel the cold anymore. All he could see was the slight tilt of her head as she laughed at something the barista said, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the rise and fall of her shoulders, the scarf. It couldn't be. But what if it was? Each step brought him closer. 10 feet, then 5. He stopped just behind her, heart pounding like it wanted to escape his chest. And then, as if some unseen thread had pulled her, the woman slowly turned. Their eyes met. Time cracked. Steve's breath hitched in his throat. The face before him had aged. There were lines that hadn't been there before. Her cheeks were thinner, her eyes more tired. But it was her. Clara. Alive. The same eyes that used to look at him with laughter, the same lips that whispered his name in the dark, the same hands that once held their child. Clara's expression shifted from confusion to shock. Her body trembled. Her hand flew to her mouth as tears welled up in her eyes. "Steve?" she whispered, the word barely more than breath. Steve couldn't speak. He couldn't move. He stood frozen, staring at the ghost who wasn't a ghost at all. Behind him, Michael had caught up. He looked from his father to the woman, eyes narrowing in childlike curiosity. And then, quietly, he said, "Mom." The woman dropped her cup, and that was the moment everything changed. The paper cup hit the icy pavement with a soft thud, dark liquid splattering across Clara's boots. Neither she nor Steve moved. The sounds of the park, the distant laughter of children, the rustling of the wind, the scrape of skates on ice, nay, seemed to dim into silence. Steve's chest tightened painfully, as if the simple act of breathing was now a monumental task. He blinked several times, hoping, irrationally, that the figure before him would vanish into the cold air like a mirage. But she didn't vanish. She was still there. Real. Solid. Trembling. Clara. She had changed. Of course she had. Time leaves fingerprints on everyone, even on memories. Her once full cheeks were leaner, her posture slightly tenser, as though years of caution had carved themselves into her spine. But her eyes, those deep hazel eyes, hadn't changed. They were the same ones he had looked into the morning of the accident. The same eyes that had once stared into his with love, laughter, and promises of forever. Now they stared at him with disbelief. "Steve," she whispered again, this time louder, more real. He swallowed hard. "Clara?" His voice cracked, thick with emotion. Is it really you?" Clara's hand hovered near her mouth, trembling fingers trying to hold back a flood of tears. I don't understand. You're alive?" Steve gave a stunned, hollow laugh. "I could ask you the same thing." There was a long pause. Too many thoughts, too many emotions, too many years. Michael stood a step behind Steve, clutching his father's coat sleeve. He looked from Clara to his father and back again. "Dad, who is she?" Clara's eyes dropped to the boy, and her entire body seemed to falter. Her lips parted. Her knees almost gave way. Steve steadied her instinctively, one hand catching her elbow. The contact was electric, as if something long dead sparked back to life beneath the skin. Michael furrowed his brows, unsure, but his eyes were locked on Clara. He tilted his head slightly. "Why did you call her Mom?" Clara knelt slowly, her breath uneven, her heart pounding so violently she thought it might tear free from her chest. She stared into Michael's eyes, those same eyes that had once looked up at her from a crib, wide and curious. He was taller now, older, but his face, God, his face, He was still hers. She whispered, unsure of what to say. What could be said? Steve reached down, gently pulling Michael closer. Michael, he said softly, his voice shaken. This is your mother. Michael took a small step back, blinking in confusion. But Mom's gone. You said she died. Steve exhaled sharply and knelt beside him. I thought she did. I believed it for 8 years. Michael looked back at Clara. His eyes scanned her face, searching, questioning. Why would someone say you were dead if you weren't? Clara let out a quiet sob, unable to answer. Steve rose slowly, his hands clenched, his gaze fixed on Clara, no longer stunned but burning with something deeper now, a tangled mess of anguish, betrayal, relief, and questions. How? He said, the word cold and sharp. How are you standing here? Clara looked down, her fingers twisting the scarf, that same scarf that had brought all of this crashing down. I didn't know you were alive, she murmured. They told me both of you were gone. Steve's jaw tightened. Who told you that? Clara hesitated. My sister and the doctors. After the crash, I was in the hospital for months. I couldn't remember anything at first. I was in and out. They said the accident was fatal for both of you. They said there was nothing left to go back to. Steve stared at her as if trying to read the truth straight from her soul. So you just accepted it? You didn't try to look, to confirm, to find us? I was broken, she whispered. Physically, mentally. And when I could finally think straight, I was in another country. I was recovering in Canada. My sister moved me there for treatment. She thought it was best if I didn't know. His fist clenched tighter. You just disappeared. I didn't mean to, Clara said, her voice catching in her throat. I thought I had lost everything. I didn't know I was the one who disappeared. I thought you had. Michael stood silent between them, caught in the weight of something far beyond his comprehension. Steve turned away briefly, his breath visible in the cold air, his mind reeling. For 8 years, he had mourned her. For 8 years, he had raised Michael alone, blaming fate for what had been stolen from them. And now, she stood here as if dropped from the sky. Clara stepped forward cautiously. Steve, please. I didn't come back to hurt you. I didn't know this would happen. I've been here for a few weeks. I'm trying to start over. He spun toward her. Start over? His voice was bitter. And what about us? What about Michael? What about all the nights he asked me where you were? All the birthdays? The tears? The lies I had to tell to keep him from breaking? Clara's eyes shimmered. I never wanted that. But it happened. She nodded slowly. I know, and I don't expect forgiveness. I didn't expect to ever see you again. Michael looked up at his father. Is she really, Mom? Steve nodded. She is. Clara reached out slightly but stopped herself. Michael, The boy looked at her for a long time, his face unreadable. Then, in a small voice, he asked, Why didn't you come back for us? Clara's heart shattered. Because I thought I had nothing left to come back to. And for the first time in years, all three of them stood in the same space, not as strangers, but as a family, broken by time, silence, and circumstance. The wind picked up slightly, rustling Clara's scarf. Steve stared at it again, a symbol of everything lost, and now found. But not yet healed. Not yet. The park had grown quieter as the afternoon faded. Most of the families had drifted away, taken their laughter and warmth with them. Only a few remained, distant silhouettes framed against the pale glow of street lamps flicker into life one by one. Snowflakes began to fall again, slow and soft, settling over branches and rooftops like memories that refused to melt. Steve, Clara, and Michael stood near the drink stand, bound by a silence that pulsed with everything unsaid. The boy shifted uncomfortably between them, sensing that something enormous had cracked open, though he couldn't yet name the shape of what spilled out. Clara lowered her gaze. "I don't know where to start," she said quietly. Steve folded his arms across his chest, more to contain the weight in his lungs than from the cold. "Try at the beginning." She took a breath, one that quivered in her chest like glass before a break. "The accident. I remember headlights, screaming, and then nothing, just darkness. When I came to, I was in a hospital in Montreal, hooked up to machines, tubes everywhere. My sister was there. She told me," her voice faltered, "she told me you were both gone." Steve's eyes narrowed. "Why Montreal?" "She had moved there 6 months before the crash. She'd been begging me to come live closer. When she got the call about the accident, she flew down immediately. I was in critical condition. They said the trauma was severe. Internal bleeding, fractured ribs, a concussion, and memory loss. She thought the only way I'd recover was away from everything." "And so she just took you?" Steve's voice was a knife edge. "Without checking, without asking anyone anything?" Clara nodded. "She told me the authorities confirmed both deaths, said there was nothing left, no reason to stay." Her hands trembled as she spoke. "I didn't even remember your names at first. It was like a wall in my head. I had pieces, flashes, the crash, a crib, laughter, but no faces." Steve looked away, jaw clenched. The pain was old, but now it throbbed like it had happened yesterday. "I had nightmares for months," Clara continued. "Every time I closed my eyes, I saw broken glass and snow, and I didn't know if what I remembered was real or imagined. My sister shielded me from everything. She meant well, I think. She wanted to protect me, but she lied." "When did it come back?" Steve asked, his voice low. Clara exhaled. "Little by little. A year later, I remembered your name. Then Michael's laugh. Then the scarf." She reached up and touched it unconsciously. "I found it buried in a box of things my sister had packed. It still smelled like our home, and it broke me. I realized something wasn't right, that maybe she'd lied. I confronted her, screamed at her, but she insisted she had done it to save me from more pain, that she was protecting me." Steve stared at the snow-covered ground. "You could have come back. I didn't know where to go. You'd moved. There was no record. My sister said everything was gone. I was lost, Steve, and ashamed." He looked up sharply. "Ashamed?" She nodded. "Because I believed the lie. I let years pass in silence, and when I finally tried to look, it was too late. Everything had changed. And I didn't know if I had the right to break back into your lives." "You were his mother," Steve said. "You always had the right." Michael stood quietly, listening. His small hands were buried deep in his coat pockets, his brow furrowed in a way too old for his years. "You know," he said suddenly, voice small but clear, "Dad never told me much about you, just that you were kind, that you used to sing when it rained, that you laughed when I kicked in my sleep." Clara looked at him with eyes wet and full. "I'm sorry I missed your birthdays," she whispered. "I'm sorry I wasn't there when you had nightmares, or when you lost your first tooth, or when you learned how to ride a bike." Michael looked up. "I don't remember you. Not really, but I think I want to." That simple sentence struck both adults harder than 1,000 accusations. Steve exhaled slowly. The anger hadn't gone, but it was being reshaped. By exhaustion, by understanding, by time. He looked at Clara again. "You could have written, called, anything. I didn't think you'd want to hear from me. I didn't think I'd ever see you again." Another silence fell. But this one wasn't sharp. It was tired, worn, like the stillness after a storm. "I'm not here to make demands," Clara said. "I don't expect forgiveness. I couldn't keep hiding. Not after everything came back. I needed to see you both, even if only once." Steve glanced at Michael, who was watching Clara with cautious curiosity, the kind children have when approaching something fragile but fascinating. "I don't know what this means," Steve said at last. "I don't know what's next." Clara nodded. "Neither do I." A long pause. Snow drifted down between them. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The hot drink stand had closed. Lights flickered on above the path. Michael stepped forward again, this time standing closer to Clara. "Do you remember what song you used to sing when it rained?" he asked. Clara blinked in surprise. Yes, I do." "Can you sing it now?" She hesitated. Then, voice cracking, she began to hum softly. The same gentle lullaby she used to sing years ago, half in tune, half in memory. Steve didn't stop her. They just stood there, the three of them, beneath the falling snow, wrapped in a moment that felt both impossible and real. And for the first time in 8 years, silence didn't mean absence. It meant presence. The city lights shimmered against the snow-dusted trees as the sky turned from pale gray to indigo. Night was settling in, casting long shadows and muffling sounds beneath a gentle hush. The once bustling park had emptied, leaving behind only the creaking of branches and the quiet breathing of 3 souls standing at a fragile crossroads. Clara sat on a nearby bench, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her scarf, the one that had unraveled 8 years of silence, was now damp from melting snow. She didn't notice. All she could see was the boy sitting across from her son, Michael. He hadn't said much since she sang the lullaby. Instead, he observed her with quiet intensity, his young face serious, his eyes darting between hers, as though trying to stitch together memories from a life he never really knew. Steve stood off to the side, leaning against a lamp-post, arms crossed, eyes watchful. He didn't interfere. For now, this was between them. Michael cleared his throat, the sound small but certain in the quiet evening. "Why did you stop singing?" Clara looked down, smiled faintly. "Because I didn't know if anyone would ever hear it again." Michael tilted his head. "You really thought we were gone?" She nodded. "Every single day." There was a pause. "I think I remember the humming," Michael said, almost as if testing the words aloud. Her heart swelled painfully. "Do you?" He nodded slowly, not the words, but the feeling. Clara blinked rapidly, tears threatening to return. "It was always your favorite," she whispered. "I used to rock you to sleep with that song." He looked at the snow. "Sometimes I still hear music when I fall asleep." Steve finally walked over, hands in his coat pockets. His expression was unreadable. "We should get going soon." Michael looked up at him. "Can we sit just a bit longer?" Steve hesitated, then gave a single nod. Clara looked between them. "I know I have no place to ask for anything," she said quietly. "But if it's okay, I'd like to see you again." Steve didn't answer right away. He watched Michael, who was still staring at Clara, his breath visible in the frigid air. "You don't have to decide now," Clara said, her voice softer. "I just wanted you to know I'm here." Michael turned to his father. Can we at least talk again? Maybe sometime? Steve glanced down at him, then slowly to Clara. We're not promising anything, he said, the words edged with caution but not resistance. This is a lot. I understand, she said quickly, but, he added, we're not closing the door either. That made Clara's breath hitch. Michael smiled faintly. Can we walk her to the bus stop? Steve looked at the time, then at Clara. Where are you staying? A temporary rental on the West End. I walk most places. Steve gestured toward the park exit. Come on, let's get you there. The three of them walked in silence at first, the snow crunching softly beneath their boots. Michael walked between his parents, glancing from one to the other, his thoughts tangled in curiosity, hope, and the unspoken wish that maybe, just maybe, something was shifting. They reached the edge of the park where the street lights cast golden pools onto the sidewalk. A city bus was approaching, headlights bright in the dusk. Clara turned to face them. I can't tell you what this means to me, she said, eyes on Michael. Just seeing you, hearing your voice, that's more than I ever hoped. Michael stepped forward and surprised her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She froze. Then, with a quiet gasp, she dropped to her knees and held him tightly, her hands cradling the back of his head, her shoulders shaking. It wasn't a perfect embrace. It wasn't a healed one, but it was real. Steve looked away. He wiped at his face without thinking. The bus pulled up with a gentle hiss. Its doors opened. Clara stood, brushing snow from her coat, still blinking through tears. I'll wait, Steve said, in case you want to reach out. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Then she stepped onto the bus, pausing at the top of the steps. Thank you, she said, looking directly at both of them. Michael waved. Steve gave a small nod. The doors closed. The bus pulled away. They watched it disappear down the street, its taillights vanishing into the dark. Steve and Michael stood in the cold for a long moment. Then Michael spoke. Is this going to change everything? Steve looked down at him. I don't know. Do you want it to? Steve thought about it. About years of raising a boy on his own, about questions he never had answers for, about the ache that never really left, and about the woman who came back from the dead not to make excuses, but to try, even if it was too late. He exhaled. Maybe. They began walking home, side by side, snowflakes collecting on their shoulders. They didn't say much more that night. But something had shifted. Not a full reunion, not a happy ending, but a chance. And sometimes that was enough. Sometimes one encounter is enough to change everything. What would you do in his place? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe. More true and heart-stopping stories are coming soon.